Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're live here from Sydney, Australia. My name is Lewis Patrice, and I'm here with Steve Orenstein, founder and Locate2U of Locate Technologies, which is listed on the ASX under the ticker code LOC. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, Lewis. Good to be here.
Excellent. So, Steve, you've just raised $1.45 million and you're looking to allocate excess cash to be held in Bitcoin. But before we jump into that, I want to ask you, can you tell me a bit more about Locate2U Technologies, Locate Technologies, LOC, and what it does?
Yeah, cool. Our business started back in 2014. Originally started with our Zoom2U business. And I might just share my screen just to give everyone, there's a number of new investors that I know have come on board with this most recent capital raise, and some joining the register even today. And so just to give them a bit of a sense of, understanding sort of our core businesses that we operate. So just sharing my screen there. And so our Zoom2U business, you can see, here, give me a second, there we go. This is what we started in 2014, and this is where we provide a same-day delivery experience across Australia for those urgent deliveries that you're wanting to get to your consumer. And provide that sort of live tracking experience. And so you can see here the live tracking experience that we provide to our customers. Today we operate with lots of small businesses that use us, lots of individuals, but also some really large corporates. And just one example here that I'll point to is on the Nespresso website here in Australia. And so as you go through the checkout process, you can actually see Zoom2U is available as an option to choose to have that delivered in the same day within 3 hours. You've got a 3-hour time slot there. And so we make this experience really simple. Customers like Nespresso and others connect to us via API, and it goes out to our network of drivers that are on the platform, allowing them to actually go through that delivery and complete that delivery, and uses our own technology that we actually developed to run the Zoom2U business. Now, what we found over the years is that we had a number of customers that were asking us to use that technology for their own business when they were managing their own fleet of drivers. And so that's where we came up and we built the Locate2U product. It's a completely brand new code base. We started from scratch, and we took all the learnings that we had inside of building the Zoom2U business and built it into its own product. It's a SaaS product. We sell that across the world. And we've got customers, in Australia, but in the US and also throughout Europe and the UK. And what this allows businesses to do, where they've got their own fleet of drivers, it allows them to do things like route optimization. And so what does that mean? It means that you can have a large number of orders for the particular day. You can put them into our optimization engine, and it will optimize them into the most efficient route. Here's one quick example I sort of pulled up earlier. You can see all these deliveries need to be done by this particular driver. The system's built it into the most efficient route. And it takes into account a whole series of different rules. Often companies come to us and they're like, well, this driver only has this much capacity or can only complete these deliveries in this particular time window. Or there's installation that needs to occur throughout the delivery. Our system sort of works that out and builds that into the most efficient route based on that. Locate2U is a very extensive product. It does everything from GPS tracking to the route optimization to things like a mobile app for the drivers, proof of delivery. There's a lot to it. And there's a lot of customization and used by some really large businesses as well as some really small businesses that have been able to provide their customers with a great experience. And ultimately across those two businesses, it's all about how do we provide customers with a really great delivery experience, knowing exactly when that driver's arriving. We've got one other smaller business that we operate, which is our Shred2U business. We actually put this together specifically because we wanted a real life business that we could use inside of Locate2U and use our Locate2U technology. And so when companies come to us to actually have some documents shredded, we use a third party for the shredding. They go through the order process, place their order on our website. And as they do that, it actually interacts directly with Locate2U. And then it goes through the Locate2U experience to actually be able to provide that live tracking to the customer. But having a core system allowing us to actually manage all of our orders for the Shred2U business, and it was a really great way of being able to test our own technology. So that gives you a pretty brief overview on our businesses. In terms of the numbers, we're a public company. We've been listed since September 21. You can go to the ASX and you can see all of our sort of public announcements there. And here on the screen, you can sort of see, our revenue numbers that we've published to the ASX in our previous announcement. So this is our last quarter announcement. You can see our businesses has grown sort of consistently over the last number of years. What we're seeing today, and you'll notice here if I go through, our Zoom to You business is sort of stabilized in its growth. When we sort of we switched in 2020 sort of to really focusing on the growth of our Locate to You business. Our Zoom to You revenue is not necessarily growing dramatically at this point in time. But what you are seeing in our Locate to You business is when we listed in September 21, it went from about $50,000 in revenue for the quarter to now it's substantially grown over that period, and we see a lot of opportunity inside of our Locate to You business growing globally. So that gives you a pretty good overview on where we are in terms of the business and what we do.
Excellent. Let's jump back into it. Thank you for that overview, Steve. So for listeners that haven't read the full release yet, can you walk us through the key points of this announcement?
Yeah, so there's a couple of key things that we announced in this raise. One, we raised some money. So we raised 1.45 million from a number of strategic investors. And the goal of this round of capital is to allocate excess cash that we raising this to Bitcoin, and sort of building our first sort of Bitcoin treasury inside of our business. And so that's one of the key things that we're looking to doing. And over the coming days and weeks, we'll start deploying that cash into Bitcoin and update the market as and when we actually do that. Secondly, as part of this capital raise, we also set up an ATM facility. And so for those that don't know what an ATM facility is, it's essentially allowing us to be able to sell shares on market at a price that we determine that makes sense. And so in a traditional way of raising capital, when you go and speak to a traditional broker, what happens is the broker says, yes, you want to raise money, I'll go out to my network, but I want to discount the share price. I want to discount on where you actually are at today. It's never fair on existing shareholders when that happens. And that's always the way in which capital raises have been done. With an ATM facility, it allows us to sell at the market. So whatever price the market is actually at, we can sell at that particular price. And so this gives us a lot more flexibility to be able to raise more capital into the future. As we see the share price rising at any point in time, we can be able to then sell a certain amount of stock into the market. And that facility has up to $2 million in capacity today. The third thing that we did is this announcement is that we also we've got some debt on our balance sheet that we took on a little while ago. There were some warrants attached to that debt, and so the warrants meant that the debt holder had the ability to convert those warrants into shares at a point in time. If we continue to raise more capital in the future, those warrants will then reset at a lower price, and it wasn't going to be a great outcome for existing shareholders. And so we spoke to our debt holder and negotiated a better outcome for that. And they've cancelled those warrants with a view of and transferring those warrants into equity at the same price that we raised today's raise. And so that's a really positive outcome for our existing shareholders and giving us a lot of flexibility moving forward.
Right. So, Steve, you founded Locate Technologies in 2014. How has the company's vision evolved since then, and how does this Bitcoin initiative align with that vision?
Yeah, look, I mean, number one is we always wanted to build a business that was how do we give customers a better delivery experience and knowing exactly when the delivery driver is actually arriving. And so we continue on that vision today, and we want to see that vision continue globally. And so, how does Bitcoin fit into that? I think there's a really, a moment in time right now where there's a transition that's happening from fiat currency into Bitcoin. And Bitcoin's a great way of being able to capture some value for our shareholders. Those that have been following Bitcoin over a number of years have seen how Bitcoin has grown substantially in value from when it started to today. And my expectation is that will continue, but that's no one can say that for sure, but that's what I think. And when we look at it at a board level, that's what we believe. And so I think businesses today, there's going to be more and more of these businesses that are looking to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, and it's definitely going to be an interesting time. I think we're the first in Australia as an operating company that's listed on the ASX to be putting Bitcoin on our balance sheet.
Excellent. That's great. So let's talk about the $1.45 million cap raise. What was the strategic thinking behind raising this specific amount, and why now?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've been talking, about it for a little while, and one of the things that we really want to make sure is that make sure the company's capitalized as best as we possibly can. And so this allows us to then, take on certain growth initiatives inside of the business. Our Locate to You product, we spent a lot of time in building that product. We're now coming sort of to the stage where we feel like the product is really well established and we're ready to take the next step in the growth of this product across the world. And so making sure that the balance sheet is really capitalized well will allow us to continue that growth. And so doing that by adding Bitcoin onto our balance sheet makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of the risk has been taken out of adding Bitcoin to your balance sheet over the last few months, with a lot of the governments around the world, particularly the US, adopting Bitcoin as a strategic reserve. A number of other companies have been doing this. ETFs are now available for Bitcoin. So I think, we're at a great time now where it makes a lot of sense for companies to start thinking about adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet.
Right. So you've made it clear that Locate Technologies will only hold Bitcoin,
Correct.
not any other cryptocurrency like Ethereum or Solana or anything like that. Can you explain the rationale behind that?
Yeah, look, I think, there are a number of obviously cryptocurrencies around available on the market. They're all different. They all do different things. Our goal is to hold Bitcoin. We believe Bitcoin is, the best asset to hold. And we do that for a number of reasons. One, obviously the cap in the supply, there's a maximum of 21 million. But also it's not controlled by any individual. It's not controlled by a corporation. It's not controlled by individuals. I think that's a really important factor of Bitcoin. And I think that's, it means it's the best asset for us to hold inside of our business.
That's fair. Have any other publicly listed companies inspired this decision for Bitcoin, and what has been their success?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously, I think, anyone in the Bitcoin community has seen the rise of companies like MicroStrategy, or now known as Strategy, Metaplanet, and many others. I've been, watching from the sidelines very closely and seeing what's been happening, understanding how they've been able to do it, and understanding their playbook, and spending a lot of time sort of looking at that and sort of thinking about what they do in their markets, how do they fit into what's available in the Australian market. And so thinking about those strategically and sort of how best we deploy this, and explain this to the Australian investor market. I think, Australia, we're still a little bit behind, and there's a lack of understanding of what's happening with Bitcoin, lack of understanding of what's happening across the world. And so, it's taken a little bit of time to make that happen.
I'm sure it will. What role do you foresee Bitcoin playing in the company's growth strategy? So especially in relation to potentially acquisitions and future expansion?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's really important for us to have a really strong balance sheet. And I think, number one, that's most important. When you do have a strong balance sheet, you've got the ability and the flexibility to do a lot of things. And so does that mean, it gives us the opportunity to do more acquisitions in the future? Absolutely. Does that mean we're going to sell our Bitcoin to buy future companies? I'd say that's probably unlikely. But it's more likely that we will be able to have a stronger balance sheet, to be able to raise equity at higher prices, to do issue shares to purchase companies. I think there's a range of different things that we can look at in the future to be able to do that.
Nice. So some shareholders may be a bit cautious about this move. How are you approaching investor education and communication around Bitcoin?
Yeah, look, I think there's two types of people. One that understand Bitcoin, and one that have very little understanding of Bitcoin. And often when I find when I've spoken about this strategy to potential investors is where they had very little understanding of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is a complex thing to understand. I think there's a fair bit around the technical aspect of how Bitcoin actually operates. What does the technology do, and what is the differences between that and the traditional banking system? And then I think the separate thing is understanding what's happening in the economics of the world. What is money? What is fiat currency? We've all grown up knowing about fiat currency and knowing about the dollars that we spend today. But that's just because that's in our lifetime. It hasn't been in hundreds of years ago, the fiat currency didn't exist. And so I think it's once you start sort of understanding that and doing a lot of research to know what is fiat currency and how does that compare, and what's happening to fiat currency today, and how that's been devalued by governments printing lots of money across the world. And so it takes time, and it takes the ability to have an open mind to sort of really learn and just think about these different concepts and think about money in a completely different way. For me, seeing and owning some Bitcoin, and then seeing how you're not reliant on a bank to actually hold that money, or hold that Bitcoin, was a big eye opener for me in sort of that first sort of stage in stepping into the Bitcoin land a number of years ago.
Yeah, right. So how do you plan to manage the volatility associated with Bitcoin as a publicly listed business?
Yeah, I think one of the great things, a company that has volatility is life. It means that there is stock being traded in our stock every single day, and that's a really important thing. It's the ability for someone to actually get in a position in our company, but also be able to get out of a position in our company. And so you need some volatility to be able to do that. And I think for me, it's thinking about this as the long term. Making sure that you've got a company, a core business that's growing, continue to be successful, but then you've got a strong balance sheet attached to that with an asset that's going to increase, that's likely to increase in value.
So the announcement also mentions a transaction with Pure Asset Management and a simplified capital structure. What's the benefit of cancelling those warrants at this time?
Yeah, so what I mentioned earlier was that Pure had these warrants. It meant that they could convert those warrants at a price, and if we continue to raise capital, that they would have been able to capture a lot larger percentage of the company, and so it didn't make commercial sense for us to be able to do this and go down this particular journey. And so we've been able to bring them on as an equity holder. They'll get a lot of upside in that equity over the coming years ahead.
Right. So let's go a bit deeper now. Like, what can you share a bit more about your experience with Bitcoin? What triggered this personal interest to begin with, and what finally gave you that conviction to act on it at a corporate level?
Yeah, look, I mean, I sort of a number of years ago started looking at Bitcoin and listening to podcasts. Got introduced to it through a couple of family members who were also interested in looking at this. And I think it's like initially when I bought it, I understand the technology, I understand what it did, but I didn't necessarily understand the economics of why this is a great idea. And so it was only sort of more recently in sort of doing a lot more reading. There's a great book called Broken Money, which really explains, what money is and what fiat currency is. And when you start reading that and start understanding that, it gives you a lot more understanding of what's happening in the fiat world today. And so, that was the start. Then obviously looking at sort of what other companies are doing outside of Australia and seeing how they've been able to adopt this to really sort of grow their business. And so this made a lot of sense. I started speaking to the board, probably about 6 months ago, and sort of talking around sort of what this meant for our company and how we could create a Bitcoin reserve on our balance sheet. And what that meant for our shareholders and also the long-term value of the company into the future.
Right. So are there any final messages for investors?
Look, I think this is just the beginning. We've got a really great product in our Locate to You business. We're thinking about building this business into the long term. It's listed here in the Australian market. We're excited to be listed and excited to see this grow into the future. And it's great to see. Even since we made this announcement yesterday, there's some new investors coming on board and joining the register. And happy to keep investors up to date and answer questions as we continue on this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of answering questions, how would an investor reach out to you and ask any of those questions? What would be the best approach?
Yeah, look, I think we plan on doing these lives on a regular basis. During that process, they can definitely ask some questions, and then if we don't answer those questions today, we'll answer those in our next sort of sessions as and when we do these. And so we're very keen to keep investors up to date in what's happening inside of the business.
Great, thank you very much, Steve Orenstein, Locate Technologies. That was fun. Excellent.
Thanks, Lewis, and thanks everyone for joining in today.
See you guys.